We've been talking about all these new forms, so let's get to the RLA, the California Residential Listing Agreement. So when you take a listing, this is the form you're going to fill out. Hey guys, I'm Brittany, a real estate agent, coach, and investor, and today we're diving into the RLA. Now keep in mind my disclaimer, I am not a forms trainer. I am simply a real estate agent, coach, and investor, and I am reading these forms and I'm presenting them to you as I read them and as I understand them. I have been to trainings, I do understand them quite well. However, I am not a forms trainer. So just let's get that out there and keep that in mind. So right now, let's turn to my screen and jump right in. So as always in all these forms, when we go on to our zip forms or to DocuSign, you have the bundle of documents. So it's not just the RLA that pops up, it's all of these other documents within this bundle. So the very first thing you see is going to be the agency relationship, the AD. So remember, you're reading through every jot and tittle of these documents. I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm just showing you how to fill these out, but it's your responsibility to understand what you're asking your clients to sign. So as we go through, you'll see I have a couple of things that are already filled out. Like right here, I have the seller is checked off. So you want to put in here your seller name. And obviously you're going to put in whatever your seller's name is. And then if you have two sellers, you can put in seller name 2. Now these dates we're just going to leave blank because when they go to sign them, that's when these dates will come into play. Anytime it's next to a seller signature, the date is going to be the date that it's signed, not the date that it's prepared. So then we start filling out down here, the real estate agent brokerage firm. So you put in the seller's agent brokerage. And then the DRE of the brokerage. And then down here is the salesperson or associate, which is the real estate agent. So then you put in the listing agent's name and the listing agent's DRE. And then again, this date is going to be the date that it's signed. So now anytime any of these populate, it's going to auto-populate. You don't have to write these in every time. So one thing that I highly, highly recommend is before you start doing this, go in and put all of this type of information, minus the sellers, go in and put all this type of information into your templates. In your templates, that's where you're going to fill it out once and you're going to be done with it. You don't have to fill it out every single time. Now we've come to the residential listing agreement, the RLA. So the very first thing you want to fill out is the date prepared. So remember, this is the date prepared, different from the date that it is signed. So we're going to put today's date, and then we already have seller 1 and seller 2. So we have this already set. Remember, I told you, you put it up once and then it's going to fill it out for you. So we already have the agent brokerage, whatever your brokerage is, the exclusive and irrevocable right to seller exchange the real property described as, and this is the property address, situated in the city and then the county. And of course it's in California because this is a California form. And then your zip code. So the APN you're going to find if you do a title search or a tax search. It's going to be called the APN, the assessor's parcel number, or just parcel number. Usually it's a 9-digit number, and we're going to leave it like that. Now we get down to our grid. And what's nice about this is that this is the basic gist of what you're filling out. So everything is in one place. So when you fill it out, you can really walk through this and talk to your client about exactly what this is. I feel like it makes it a lot easier to have this conversation and to just walk through what it is exactly that they're signing because it's all in one space. As opposed to this one paragraph is this, and then 3 paragraphs later, this is another thing that we need to keep an eye on. We're just basically focused in on the grid. Now, of course, just like in our other forms, we have the section on the left over here, and then that is a paragraph number that it is associated with. So we have over here, section A1, the paragraph associated is 4G. So if we go down here to 4G, we have the maximum listing time period. So all of these things up here get described down below, and you can find where the description is in this paragraph number. Now, this is going to be good for you if you have any questions, but also for your clients. So make sure to let them know and explain how this works so they can go back and read it if they want to read it on their own. All right, so now let's jump in. Now, the listing period cannot exceed 24 months, so you don't want it to go any longer than 24 months. Usually for a listing, I'll do it for about a year. So if we say the listing starts today, then we do it for a year from now. So we'll be in October of 2025. I like it to end on the last day of the month, just so that I don't have things expiring on random days. Everything is the last day of the month, so I can go and check that. Remember, we're always thinking about how to make things scalable. And when we talk about your calendar and as it gets booked and busy, you want things to be streamlined. So if we say everything ends on the last day of the month, if because it's October 2nd, you want to backtrack it and say, actually, let's do it for September 30th, that's okay too. You just want it to be on the last day of the month. But realistically, you could do it anytime you wanted. Okay, here's where we write in the listing price. So I'm going to write in $1 million, and then you can see that it writes it out for me. So there are a couple places where it'll do this, whether in the RPA, the RLA, the BRBC, it's writing things out for you as kind of a fail-safe. So you want to make sure that if you're writing this out, it's exactly the same over here. Because you can see if I add one more zero, that is going to be very different. that goes to 10 million as opposed to 1 million. So it's kind of just making sure we're writing in the correct amount. Now, if we're talking about property specific listings, you're going to check these off, and then it adds in different forms for you. So if you have a manufactured home, it'll add the MHLA addendum, which basically these are going to be specific information that adds to your listing agreement. But you always start with the listing agreement, and then you add on the addenda. This is the same for the RPA. If you have an RPA, but it's for a manufactured home, you do the regular RPA, and then you fill out the manufactured home addendum. You check this off if it's probate, conservatorship, guardianship, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if it's for a specific use, that's what we would add, but we start with the RLA. All right, so then of course we have the compensation notice. The amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually, may be negotiated between buyer and seller. Of course, they needed to write this because of the NAR settlement. So they wanted to just make sure that it says it everywhere. It's negotiable, but remember, it always has been, it always will be. Compensation is negotiable. Now, the difference here is we're writing in what we're getting as the listing agent. That is completely separate from what we're writing in for the buyer's agent. Essentially, what we used to do is we used to say, my commission is X, 6%, 7%, 5%, whatever it was. And then you split that in half and give half of it to the buyer's agent. Well, this whole NAR settlement, that's exactly what it was about. It was saying the sellers were getting together saying, it's not fair that I have to pay the buyer side of the commission when I have no say in their representation. Now, the reality is that it's always been negotiable. So if the seller wanted to say, I don't want to pay for the buyer's side, they could have done that. If the seller wanted to say, I'm only paying 4%, you do what you want with it, they could have done that. But the reason everything is coming to light is because it was kind of like this is just how it's always been done. And so they wanted to say no more. That's price fixing. We don't want to do that. Whether it was or wasn't, we don't need to talk about that anymore, because the reality is this is where we stand now, and here's how we move forward. So now when we're filling out this form, we're only talking about the compensation side to the list side. Now, of course, we want to have this conversation about what does this mean for our sellers? What does this mean for compensation from the buyers? Now, I've just done a bunch of videos and a bunch of trainings on exactly this topic. And so one of the best things, I've talked to a lot of agents about this, one of the best things that I feel like I know and talk to my clients about is just saying, hey, we're going to get you the highest net for your property. So whether that is somebody coming in and saying, I'm going to overpay, but I'm asking for the buyer's agent compensation to be paid by the seller, or whether they're saying, hey, I'm going to underpay, but I don't need the compensation paid by the seller, or whether they come in at full price and say, you pay the compensation, seller. Whatever that is, we're looking at the net amount. So how much is the seller going to net? And our goal, assuming this is our seller's goal, is always to get them the highest net, because it doesn't matter where that money comes from as long as in the end they get to pocket what they want to pocket. So the conversation here is always about net, nothing but net. That's our focus, nothing but net. And so when we're talking about this compensation, we're talking about it just on the listing side. However, we want to make sure that we're having this conversation so that they understand the buyer side as well. All right, so let's jump into this. So compensation to seller's broker, let's just go ahead and put 3% just for funsies. Then it says, and if any. This is like if your office charges an admin fee or you want to charge the TC fee or whatever it is. I'm going to put an amount here. We're basically passing that on to our seller. Now, keep in mind that a lot of people, a lot of agents might not do this because they might say, this is the cost of doing business. I don't need to do this, yada, yada, yada. Okay, great. But so this is totally up to you. You can decide whatever it is. Then it's saying, or see attached compensation schedule. This is if you were to say something to the effect of, hey, if I sell it in this amount of days, it's going to be this price. If it takes me this long, it's going to be this price. I don't ever do that. I say, this is the price I charge because I'm going to be doing all of these things. And, or I have a listing compensation menu of services where I'm saying, choose which services you want. This is the price for each service. So you can do it however you want. It's just transparency, making sure you are in agreement with the seller. Then this down here is saying additional compensation to seller's broker if the buyer is unrepresented. So this is saying it does not apply to dual agency. So this is not saying a buyer comes in and wants you to represent them as their agent. This is them. In that regard, you would basically be filling out the RPA for them. Of course, the BRBC, because they want you to be their agent. You're filling out the RPA and you're negotiating basically whatever your clients want, how you're going to get paid your compensation. What this is different. This is if the buyer is unrepresented and they do not want to be represented. Now, there are pros and cons to this, mostly cons. So don't let your seller think, oh, this is best case scenario, because it's really not. You want to make sure that both sides are represented in one way, shape, or form. But basically, this is saying, okay, well, if you are representing this person, essentially, you're not technically representing them, but if they come unrepresented, that's going to be additional liability for you. It's going to be additional work for you. And so you're asking the seller to pay a certain amount if the buyer they end up choosing is unrepresented. So you're going to check that, and whatever you decide that to be, whether you say 2%, 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is, you're going to write that in. And then if you wanted to add any fees on, you could do that. Or again, that attached compensation schedule. So this is where I was saying, it doesn't apply to dual agency because it says if broker represents both buyer and seller, that's dual agency, buyer side compensation shall be specified in a separate written agreement. So the buyer side compensation is totally separate. It's the BRBC, and then you're going to negotiate with the RPA. Very different from an unrepresented buyer. That's where this falls. Continuation of right to compensation. This is saying that after the listing period expires, you still have a continuation period. So you could say 30 days, 90 days, whatever you wanted, or you don't have to write anything in there at all. The reality is this is basically saying, you know, if your listing agreement expires October 31st, 2025, and then somebody comes on November 15th, then all of this still stays in place if you're going to be facilitating this agreement. And you're saying you're eligible for compensation because basically everything you did up until this point is how that buyer found them. So it's basically just a protection for you. Now this is saying seller's obligation to pay previous brokers. So if there was a previous broker, what is the compensation if owed, if the property was transferred, yada, yada, yada. This is just detailed out if they were listed before or if they were working with another agent. This is where this would be spelled out. Now, all of these are just items included or excluded from the sale. So items included are generally things that are commonplace items, like the stove, the microwave if it's built in, the dishwasher, anything that is affixed. Ceiling fans, chandeliers, curtains, all of those are generally always included. So you don't have to write that out. But if there's something that they say, oh, well, a fridge is often negotiable. Do you want to sell the fridge, the washer and dryer, all of that kind of stuff? If they say yes, include it with the property, great. That's where you would write this in. And then excluded items. This would be if they said, oh, I have this chandelier from my grandparents' vintage. I want to take that. Or I am going on a listing appointment soon where they're saying, I have these plants that are actually like really meaningful to me. And so should I take them up? And basically what I told them is anything that you want to take with you, be sure to pot it and make it so that it is obviously not part of the sale. Because if it's planted in the ground, the assumption is that's going to be part of the sale. So anything that you want to take with you, you want to pack it up before. Same thing with a chandelier. If it's something that's like a statement piece and somebody's going to say, wow, I love that, you want to make sure that you're taking it down. So if that's not the case and you can't do that, maybe let's say chandelier. I can't spell that. I don't know how that's spelled. But you get the gist. That's going to be an excluded item. So if you say, no, I really want these, but I can't take it down yet, that's where you would do that. Then we talk about leased items. And this is really, again, just kind of a conversation starter. This is a good time to ask these questions. You don't have to write this down. This is not the end all be all. Where you really want to make sure all this is written is in the RPA. That's where the sale is going to be negotiated. So you want to make sure that even like a solar power system, if it's leased or if it's liened, like if they owe money on it, you want to make sure that you are aware of that so that you can let any buyers who come to the property know that that needs to be included. The buyer needs to be able to qualify for the solar lien or whatever it is. So it's a good time to be aware of this stuff, but it's not totally necessary to have all this. It's just a good conversation to have. Smart home features that they prefer to include or exclude. Again, this is just negotiation. So if they say, yes, I want to include the video doorbell or a security system or whatever, this is where you would put this stuff, because it will help you in negotiations. It'll help you understand what your seller wants to leave and what they're planning on taking. So again, all of this information is just better to have in the beginning. Now, the property will be marketed in the following MLS. So you put your primary MLS, and if that's different from the MLS that is the location of their house, you want to make sure that you're writing this in. Again, this is just transparency so they understand, yes, I'm part of your main MLS or I'm not. And so they're not going to get as much exposure. That's basically what that means. Seller instructs broker not to take or use photographs in marketing except as required by MLS rules. So again, this is if the seller says, I don't want it marketed. I don't want anything on it. I don't want, any photos, anything like that. Now, you as the listing agent are going to be telling them, hey, it is best to get the best exposure, most amount of buyers to have really good photography. So in general, we're not going to check this box unless they explicitly tell us that that's what they want. Then we go to timing of presentation of offers. The default is to present all offers as received. And so you can leave it at that. Or if you say, I know we're going to get an influx of offers, and so we want the offers presented on, we're going to go live on Friday. We want all offers in by Tuesday at 5 p.m. That's when you're going to write this in on whatever date, Tuesday, or however many days after the property is listed on the MLS. So you could say 7 days after the property is listed. A lot of times if you do like a probate or there's a court date or something like that, they require that it's listed for at least 7 days or a specific time period. That's where this would fall under. This is saying the buyer supplemental offer letters, buyer letters, love letters, whatever you call them. The default is the seller instructs broker not to present buyer letters. Now, this is always my recommendation, is we don't want to see those buyer letters because it's basically protecting your seller from fair housing discrimination. You don't want them to accidentally discriminate because they like this one family that looks like the family in the magazine versus this other family where it doesn't look as what they think should be in the neighborhood or something like that. So you want to make sure that you are not even giving them the opportunity to accidentally discriminate and open themselves up to a lawsuit. Because let's face it, we're in California. People love to sue. So the default is going to be seller instructs broker not to present buyer letters. And only if they say, nope, I really want those, are we going to check this box. So we're going to leave it blank. Now we go on to investigation reports. So automatically the natural hazard disclosure is checked and you can't uncheck it. So we leave that as is. And the only real other one that we're going to decide on if we want that inspected is if we, number one, see something that's pretty obvious, like, hey, the roof is really falling apart. We should get it inspected to be able to tell the buyers how much it would be, what a credit might be, something like that. So we might want to get something inspected if it's very obviously needing work. Secondly, though, we may want to just say, hey, we want to do a general property inspection. That's the home inspection, because we don't want any surprises. Now, I tend to do this a lot of times, especially if it's an older home. I've been burned before where the sellers are like, this is a great home. Everything works well and everything's great. We bring the home inspection in and it was like a hot mess. And so now I really play it by ear and I say, okay, we may need to get a home inspection before it's done. And in some markets, in some parts of your areas, this may be common practice. I know in the Central Coast, this is more common practice than it is down in my area in Southern California. And so when people see that there's already been a property inspection done, they're kind of taken aback in my area. They're like, wait, what? And in the Central Coast, if it hasn't been done, people are like, well, where is it? How am I supposed to write my offer if I don't know what's going on? So it really depends on your market. It's kind of market specific, but it is something that I do recommend, especially if you think that there might be some surprises that are coming up. And then, of course, the seller usually pays for these reports. And then it says seller shall order and pay for any reports selected within 5 days, or however many days you put here, of the beginning date of this agreement. So basically within 5 days of the day we're meeting with them, they should order it and then they pay for it. Now, sometimes I will do this for them. I'll say, hey, I can order the report for you, but they usually will foot the bill for it. So that's something to just know. Exceptions to ownership and title. This is if the person I'm meeting with is not the person on title or some other things that we just need to know about. In general, that's not the case, so we're just going to leave this blank. Seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property as part of the transaction. So if the seller is saying, I want to move, I want to buy something before I sell or at the same time or a concurrent close or whatever, this is where you would mark this. But if you don't have anything like that, if they're selling and moving to a rental, or if they're selling and moving out of state or anything like that, then you just leave this blank. Now we have here seller opts out. This is if the seller is saying, I want lots of privacy. I don't want any signs. I don't want any key safes, lock boxes, Supras, anything like that. I don't want anything. Now, of course, this is a good time to have the conversation about the benefits of certain things like this, how it's safe, how we make sure that only realtors can look into this, yada, yada, all that kind of stuff. But some agents also opt out of putting signage up. A lot of times I'll do that if it's an exclusive listing. I won't put any signs up because that adds to the exclusivity of it. So just keep in mind that there are different times when you may want to check this off, but in general, you just leave this blank unless the seller is requesting it. Additional terms. This would be if you are saying it's a 1031 exchange or there's something else that you're adding here that you both need to know. Now remember, this RLA doesn't really go anywhere except in a file in your brokerage. And so nothing that's said here is going to translate to the actual transaction unless it's on the RPA or an addendum. So this is just basically making sure we're all on the same page. Okay, then we have here advisories. These, again, like they're only checked if these are specific, like a trust advisory, REO, which is real estate owned, like if the bank owns it, short sale, all of these kind of things. But in a traditional sale, you're going to leave these all blank. Broker compensation is automatically checked off. And basically that's saying I'm agreeing to pay the broker whatever we have agreed to before. And then any additional addenda is going to be here. All right, then down here, we've come to the end of our grid. So the rest of this is just a read and sign. And so we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom because remember, you are going to be filling all of this out. You check this box if it's an entity signer, a corporation, LLC, probate estate, partnership, et cetera, et cetera. If it's regular sellers, then you leave it blank. Then down here, we want to put in as much information as possible. One of the reasons I like to do this is because then I can send this to my TC and they have all the information they need. Another reason I like to do this is to make sure that I have the correct information. So if I don't have all of their specific information about their city, maybe I want to get their preferred email and phone number, I'm going to leave this blank and let them fill it out. And then agent brokerage, again, this is the stuff that we want to put in our templates because I don't want to fill this out every single time. And then the broker agent, that's going to be me. I'm the agent. So it's going to be my own phone number. Okay. And email is going to be agent email. And then the agent DRE. Then if there's a second agent working with you, you can write that, more than one agent from the same brokerage or two brokers with different companies. You check these boxes. Then we get to more addendas. So we have the multiple listing service. So this is basically saying I'm going to be putting it in the MLS. Here's information about the MLS. So the default is that this is a condition of the RLA, the residential listing agreement, and it's dated 10/2. So we just don't want to make sure it's filled out properly. It is, so we keep moving on, and we have the seller name, agent, all of that. Then we have the seller's advisory for them to look through. Broker compensation this is where we talk about here's how you're going to be paying. And then we have the seller's signature here. This is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Basically, this is saying like I can work with multiple sellers, I can work with multiple buyers, I can do dual agency, yada, yada, yada. Now here's where it says offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advise that the seller or the listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions, but the buyer's offer unless all parties and their agent has signed a written confidentiality agreement. So when people say, I can't say, I can't say, that is from back in the day. Now the offers are not inherently confidential unless there is a confidentiality agreement signed. If there is not, they're free reign. If it helps you as a listing agent to share the information that the other buyers have sent, you absolutely can. So this is where that says that. Okay, and then here you're only gonna have your seller sign, and then the buyers are gonna sign later, and the buyer broker information is filled out later because you're only representing the seller here. You just want the seller to understand that you may be representing more than one person. Fair housing and discrimination. Again, only the seller signs because you don't have a buyer yet. And then the California privacy. And we've gotten to the bottom. That is it. I hope that helped give you some clarity and shed some light on the RLA. It's not as scary as it seems. And the reality is the more you practice it, the easier and quicker and less scary it becomes. So make sure you're practicing this. Make sure you're doing it on your own house, your parents' house, your brother's house, your sister's house. Make sure you're practicing this so that you've got it down pat. Once you have it down, it's really easy and not that daunting or scary. So if you're looking for more real estate resources, be sure to go to the description below and click the link for freebies. We have all kinds of good stuff for you and the list keeps growing. So make sure that you jump down to that link and get your real estate freebies. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.